So, hi. So, if you're watching this, it means that you're a participant of VegFest UK's Summerfest 2020. So, welcome along indeed. My name is Dr. Roger Yates from the Vegan Information Project. So, I have with me two remarkable vegans, Harold Brown and Declan Bowens. Harold runs an organization called FarmKind, and you can find that on farmkind.org on the net. And essentially, we're talking about transitioning farmers from animal-based farming to plant-based farming. Declan runs a group called VEGO, which stands for Vegan Education on the Go, and you can find that on veganstreetactivist.org on the net. He also, with his partner, runs the Back into Daylight Vegan Animal Sanctuary. I always think Back into Daylight is a great name for an animal sanctuary. So, as I said then, both Harold and Declan are remarkable vegans in the sense that they were both born into the animal farming community. Harold in the United States and Declan in Ireland. So now Harold tends to say that veganism is a moral and ethical way of being in the world, and Declan is always keen to encourage people to go vegan when he does his street work every week in Dublin. So thanks a lot, guys, for coming and for giving your time to this. So I guess you could maybe call yourself rebels. I don't know, maybe even rebels as a child. But really, what I want to know first is on the grounds that you'll probably still know people from the animal farming industry. So how do they view you now as a vegan activist? So Harold could go first, perhaps.
The ones in this area, I live in New York now. I grew up in Michigan, but the ones in this area are pretty tolerant of me. They know who I am, where I come from, and we sometimes have some very interesting conversations because I think deep down their conscience is always biting them. So we talk once in a while. Back in Michigan, those people, mainly because geography, I don't see or talk to them. And of course, they don't reach out to me either. So,
So with you, Declan, I think it's a similar story, isn't it? That you don't have a lot of contact, but just still with a couple of people. Is that right?
Yes, right. I don't have much contact with any of the farmers really, but I'm surrounded by two big dairy farms. Each of them have about 300 cows on their farms. So, but when I was younger, though, I used to paddle with a couple of farmers. Like we used to play football and stuff together. So they all knew I was a vegetarian at that stage and stuff. But when I found out about the huge subsidies that the farmers get. I confronted a few of my friends and that, and they weren't very happy, like it was kind of hidden down through the years that the farmers were getting such huge subsidies. And actually back in the 70s, 80s, and maybe early 90s, it was called Farmer's Dole, and then they changed it to subsidy to make it look better for the farmers, which is a very strange thing to do, like, taking them off the road and putting them on this subsidy. Like, I think, like, that's a huge problem and a huge thing we need to get across to people to see the subsidies to get. You know what, Roger, when on the street with me, sometimes that's some farmers, they say 75% of their income is subsidies. I know there's nothing wrong with that if they're growing crops and stuff, but to giving it to farmers for killing animals and that is I think is ridiculous. When you only when you put so much money and materials into meat and that, and then you get very little back. Whereas with the crops, it's, the money you put in, you get thousands of times more food back.
The conversion ratio.
Yeah.
There is like a stigma to the Farmer's Dole, as you said. It was known in Ireland. Is that what your organisation does, Harold? Does it kind of help people switch their subsidies? Is that part of what you do?
Well, in the United States, subsidies are primarily invested in crops, not animals. So the USDA gives out huge subsidies for corn, soybeans, wheat, cotton is another big one, and rice. Those are the big five. But corn and soy are the two biggest ones. But we're not talking about corn and soy for human consumption. These are row crops. These are feed crops. So that's where most of the money goes. And we actually have I point people that want to learn more about this, at least here in the United States, to an organization. Their website is ewg.org. It's called Environmental Working Group. And anybody in the United States, even if they live in an urban area, because they're shocked, they will say live in New York City. And they say you can put on in your zip code and you can find out, because the federal government writes these subsidy checks and it's in the public record. So every year you can see where these checks go to. The vast amount of these, majority of these checks go, actually, the dollars go to people who live in major urban areas. And the reason that is, then some of them are actually professional athletes and stuff, it's because their portfolios are invested in feed crops. So they're getting these big subsidy checks, but they've never been on a farm. They don't know why they're getting this. They're just, somebody said, hey, you need some corn stocks. So that's how it works. And
so that's all about stocks and shares in that case. Because you've got a website in Ireland, Declan, that shows you the subsidies as well, haven't you?
Yeah, but a few years ago, Roger, like the farmers kicked up, and I think you can only see the top 10 in each county in Ireland now. You know, the farmers kicked up that, you know, you can print in their name, like Harold says, and see the subsidy, but you can't do it now. I think you might be able to do it if you do that thing, you know, pay a bit of money and, you know,
Oh,
what do you call that?
yeah, okay. So yeah, so they don't really like the transparency. They want to keep it a bit hidden then. But that's
Yeah.
Again to do with the stigma, I suppose.
Yeah, you can see the top 10 just, but in what Harold says there, though, like if they're subsidizing the farmers to grow all these crops for the meat and dairy industry, like that's an indirect subsidy, Harold, you know, so it's more or less the same thing, but a certain amount of subsidies all over Europe and including Ireland, you know, but maybe not quite as much as you get in America, but they do get some subsidies as well.
Mm-hmm. I was interested. You said that you're in between a couple of dairy farms.
Yeah.
Do they put a cap on how many cows can be on a dairy farm?
No, there's no caps now. The cap was on the milk quotas up until 2016, and since then, like the amount of animals in the fields in Ireland is huge, especially on the dairy farms. You know, like it's gigantic. You know, and they seem to be renting more land than ever to put more and more cows on the farms. You know, so. But it's ridiculous. Like we had a bit of a drought there for 3 months early in the summer here in Ireland, and I reckon if we went on another month, God, there would have been, you know, very little grass for all these animals to eat because they're so overstocked. You know, I see in the field right beside me the cows have been in 3 times this year already, whereas other years I might only come to this field twice in the whole year. You know, so they were getting scared, but now we've plenty of weather and the grass is.
Yeah, we're back to the Irish rain now. But yeah, I've seen that field, and the grass was quite low.
Yeah.
Harold, I was a bit intrigued by something from your website. It said helping farmers who want and need to transition from animal-based practices to plant-based. And I was just wondering what you meant by want and need. You know, the need bit.
The need part of it comes from so many farmers, more and more farmers in the United States, regardless of the animals they're raising, are under contract to a large producer like Tyson or JBS or whomever. And the thing is farmers don't traditionally get a paycheck every month. Like most people get a paycheck every week, 2 weeks. Farmers don't even give them a month. It's at the end of a crop season. It's during harvest. It's during auctions and so on. That's when you make your money. So these big corporations come in and they say, oh, you've got a couple thousand acres. We're going to need that for crops. And we see you've got some barns and say you're raising chicken or hogs. And they'll say, okay, what we'll do is we'll build more barns for you and increase your production and so on and so forth. And you're going to get a monthly paycheck. And they usually, several years ago, they were saying you should make between $100,000 and $150,000 a year. And then there's all these stipulations in their contract. Over time, they find ways of screwing the farmer by saying, well, you didn't meet production quotas, your quality of the crops you took in weren't quite what we expected. They find all kinds of ways, and within 3 to 4 years, these people go from making, say, 100,000 a year down to anywhere from 25 to 50,000 a year. And that at that point, they can't pay, pay for their implements. They can't pay for their property taxes and so on. Then the corporation comes in and then takes their land as a trade-off for their debt, and they basically become serfs on their own land.
Yeah.
And then they get pushed out, and some of them will reach out and say, "Okay, I'm getting screwed. Do you have any ideas on how I can make this profitable?" And I say, "Yeah, well, first off, you got to understand, it's the animal industry that's screwing you. You need to get away from them, and then find another way of making money." And they'll say, "But I don't know how to grow vegetables." Say, "Hey, you got seed drills, you got plows, you got everything you need. It's just you've got cooperative extension to work with. You can figure this out. It's easy. And there's actually some grants that can be had and so on."
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I always say that farmers don't really need to be scared of vegans. There might be more farmers on the land in a vegan world than there are now, but it's the mega farmers, the ones that are kind of, as you say, kind of exploiting the smaller farmers. They're probably the ones that are going to suffer from the vegan world. But so be it in that sense. Declan, you're back on the street now with this easing of the lockdown, and I see that you've got some new posters about COVID-19. And are you making that connection to animal use in general? And how's it going for you?
Yeah, we are making the connection rather to animal use with the posters. Yeah, but I think it's an ideal opportunity to show people where all these diseases came from, and the abuse of the animals, and over stocking and everything like that, which is probably doing it, but I think it's a perfect opportunity to show people and make them think, because if people are a bit scared, which all of us were terribly scared probably at the start of all this, but we're getting more relaxed as time goes on, I suppose. But it makes people think it, that sort of way. And like even during the COVID in Ireland, like all the meat factory workers were getting COVID, and they kept the factories going. Whereas if that happened in an ordinary factory, the factory would have been closed down, or a big office, the offices would have been closed down, where these poor workers had to keep going, and they were in very close proximity, in the job that they do.
Well, on the grounds that I mean, we're speaking to a couple of experts here. I've wondered why was it that the slaughterhouses and the meat plants were almost like epicenters of this virus? Is that because it's not that the virus is in the other animals who arrive, but it might be on them, and it could come from the farms into the so-called processing plants?
To begin with, meatpacking plants are put out in the middle of nowhere in poor communities, and most of the people who work there are people of color. And the surprising thing I learned recently is that they found that more and more poor people from Africa are taking jobs in meatpacking. Mm-hmm. And but of course, traditionally, a lot of our workers come from Mexico, Central and South America, and they get paid, substandard wages by and large. They're not allowed to collectively bargain. And the thing is because of the living conditions they're in, the spread of COVID has been pretty bad. A good analogy would be the Native American population here in the United States. Per capita, they have had the highest infection and death rate from COVID of any group in the United States. So when you don't have access to clean water, access to health care, and so on, like many of these workers, and in meatpacking, especially in the processing end of it, these people are working shoulder to shoulder, and they're trying to find a way to ameliorate that, but to keep the line speeds going, they can't help but keep people working shoulder to shoulder. So the transmission rates are pretty high.
Yeah, and I suppose that they're probably put up in a kind of hostile situation. The same with you, Declan, that the local slaughterhouse to you, it's almost
Yeah.
like exclusively Brazilian workers, wasn't it?
Oh, mostly it was Brazilian Roger working in that one, yeah. And but there was a thing there about a fortnight ago. There was a meeting with the farming organisations and the workers in the slaughterhouses, you know, because of the COVID, and the workers were saying that 60% of the workers in slaughterhouses are immigrants, and you know, foreign nationals, and the farmers were trying to say it was only 20%. But you know, the workers were saying like all the stats are out there, and they got the stats together to show. You know, I'd say it's even more. I'd say it's 80 or 90% of the workers are immigrants in the slaughterhouses. You know.
Or you know why they do that? They do the same thing here in the United States. Is because it's food. And Roger probably has a much better handle on this. But the sociology of food and how it ties into culture, it's like here in America, food has to be, you know, mom, apple pie, and the American flag. So if people think your food is being produced primarily by people of color, people that are, you know, illegal immigrants and stuff, people are on temporary visas, that's a problem for some Americans. And that may be the
You
same.
can even be racist about your food.
Yeah. So it's a job that, you know, Irish people wouldn't do, or you know, ordinary Americans wouldn't do. So that's why they get them in to do it. You know, it was the same in Ireland here 10 years ago in a big boom we had. That was, you know, an awful amount of immigrants from South America and all European countries, and when there was plenty of work, and the authorities turned a blind eye to all these people from other countries being here, you know. So when the recession came, but the police started stopping all the cars on the road, like none of them had insurance and stuff, so they told them they'd have to go when there was no work for them, you know. But they tolerate the slaughterhouse workers because they're doing a job, you know, they can do it. So
yeah, when I was in Wales, I knew that the slaughterhouses, they had a big turnover of staff, and so that's probably why they go more and more kind of marginal to get more and more people who really can't kind of refuse and quit in that sense. So we're coming to the end of our time, folks, and it's absolutely brilliant to have a couple of experts to kind of enlighten us on, you know, the ins and outs of what goes on, you know, in animal agriculture and agriculture in general, subsidies, etc. So is there any final brief statement that you would like to make before we close this?
I was just wondering, could I ask Harold a question? Does he think that there'll be more workers involved, you know, in growing crops and organic crops and that than farming animals?
I think so, especially because of the COVID crisis. Yeah. And I think the work you're doing, and it's something that I'm building to put out in the world, is that if we become plant-based cultures, then these zoonotic diseases are not going to be the problem that they are now. Because this has been a wake-up call here in the United States. I just saw something that was published by an organization called Dive, which does supermarket sales statistics. And they said since COVID has taken hold, the people who do the marketing within the stores are now putting the plant-based burgers and so on, the meat analogs, right in the meat case next to them, because we didn't do that before. Mm-hmm. And they found that there's been a jump of 28% sales increase on the plant-based meat analogs. And these are people that, you know, our activism has kind of been shut down also, except for online. So people are waking up. They're putting two and two together, and they're saying, hey, you know, this came from animals. What other things do we have to worry about? You know, and I think the time is right that we can make a change.
Yeah, brilliant. That's fantastic.
I hope I hope it's true. And I want to thank you for spending time with us. And I hope people tuning in will enjoy the rest of Summerfest. And thanks again, folks, for being with me. Thanks very much, Harold and Declan.
been
Look, Roger.